What's up, everybody? The Game 2K2 here once again. A couple weeks ago, I did my top 10 list on what I thought were the best comic book films so far. Today, I feel like going in the opposite direction, so today I'm doing my top 10 worst comic book films so far. Now, before I begin, let me just give the usual warning. If you don't agree with my choices, please do not get angry. In fact, I'm interested to see what your top 10 list would be. Now, let's not waste any more time. Let's begin. Number 10. Hulk. Alright, I was like everyone else before this movie released. I was so excited. The Hulk is one of those superheroes that is just tough to hate because he's just so awesome. So naturally, I was there opening night to see this movie, ready to see one of the most loyal comic book films ever created. And what did I get? A movie so bad that I had to walk out of theaters halfway through it because I was so pissed. I couldn't believe it! They could not have made this any more uninteresting. The writers tried to add what they thought would be a more fitting backstory for the Hulk and completely missed the point of the original comic. To top it all off, the acting is crap. I know the original TV show wasn't necessarily recognized for its acting either, but this is an era where most comic book films have tremendous acting. In fact, I'm surprised there haven't been more comic book films nominated for Oscars and Golden Globes. The acting in this movie is really unconvincing, and for a character as outrageous as the Hulk, good acting was really necessary to make him believable, but unfortunately we don't get that. So yeah, this film is unbelievably horrible. In fact, it should be noted that the title is just the Hulk, and not the Incredible Hulk. Maybe that should have been a clue. A few years later, they would make up for it with another film adaptation titled The Incredible Hulk, and while I didn't find it to be perfect, it certainly was better and made up for this pile of crap. Number 9. Spawn. Spawn was one of those films that I really hoped would be great because I love the Spawn character. However, this film has no clear direction when it comes to story and tone. It's just a mishmash of great visuals and a cruddy story. When it comes to the tone, the film is just way too dark. The film was clearly trying to mimic other comic book films at the time like Batman and The Crow when it came to its tone, but they leave out the more campy and humorous elements and just go with the dark tone, and that just doesn't work and makes the film feel bland in a lot of ways. Also, Michael J. White, I absolutely hate it in the title role. He doesn't give that great of a performance, and the rest of the cast just seems really uninterested, and that doesn't help any movie become anything great. So overall, it's dark and it's gritty, but that's really about it. There's a lot missing from Spawn that keeps it from gaining any sort of credibility, and it's unfortunate because Spawn is such a great comic book character. This is one character that I think deserves a reboot. Number 8. Catwoman. Now, to be fair, my expectations were never truly high for Catwoman. The character had always worked best when she wasn't the main character. She simply does not seem like a standalone character for a film. Production for Catwoman was a long one because it dated all the way back to Batman Returns. In fact, Michelle Pfeiffer was supposed to reprise the role. To be honest, I think that would have been better. Pfeiffer truly ruled in the role, and if it was going to be made in a way similar to Batman and Batman Returns, I would have been a little more interested. But unfortunately, production ran on way too long, and writers changed, and the cast changed. Halle Berry was selected, and while she wouldn't have been my first choice, it didn't bother me. Berry is a great actress, and I thought she might have been able to pull it off. However, the trailer for the movie was a dead giveaway on how this movie was going to be. Not only does this film have nothing in common with the comic, besides the main character being called Catwoman, but the story is one of the worst stories ever. Halle Berry's acting skills went completely out the window for this role, and she easily gives the worst performance ever in her career. The movie barely has a plot and quite frankly doesn't have a reason for existing. Number 7. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. First of all, I loved the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. In fact, I still believe it's one of the most underrated films ever made. However, one of the reasons why I love that film so much is that not only does it manage to incorporate the style of the cartoon series, but it still manages to remain very loyal to the original comics as well, keeping the tone dark and gritty, and for a film about 4 big walking, talking turtles, that's quite an accomplishment. Then came the second film, where the filmmakers decided to make it more kid-friendly. In fact, a couple franchises did the same thing. I still don't know why studios do this. They can clearly see why the first film became successful, and yet choose not to do the same thing for the second film. Ninja Turtles 2 could not be any more different from its predecessor. It's more lighthearted and much more cheesy. To top it all off, it tries to become more mainstream by including stars like Vanilla Ice, which make the film 10 times worse. I know many people are going to argue that this film is not quite as bad as the third film, but to be honest, I don't mind the third film. I like the third film's story a lot more, and while the jokes did stretch a little too far and the turtles look horrendous, I still thought that film was a little better than Ninja Turtles 2. Number 6. Son of the Mask. Hey, New Line Cinema was in charge of this one too. When Jim Carrey declined to return, they should have simply scrapped this movie before putting any money into it. Seriously, this was after Dumb and Dumber. You think they would have learned their lesson. But no, they had to make another Jim Carrey-less sequel, and it's even worse than Dumb and Dumber. This is disgraceful. There's no effort by the director, actors, and even the effects are worse, and this is 11 years after the first movie, and it's on a higher budget. If there had been the slightest bit of effort in this, I would have forgiven it a little bit more. But no, it's just another rushed mess that New Line Cinema thought would make a lot of money. Well, on the bright side, there's no other Jim Carrey-less sequel out there. I really hate Hollywood. Number 5. Howard the Duck. I have to admit, I was never a Howard the Duck fan. I never liked the comics, and I thought the concept was pretty silly, so I probably shouldn't have been surprised that this film was even more silly. But with Howard the Duck, the reason why I disliked this movie so much is because it was literally brought to the big screen by some of Hollywood's best. Lucasfilm played a big part in the film. In fact, George Lucas would actually be one of the producers. It also stars Lea Thompson, who is one of my favorite actresses, and she was literally coming off of Back to the Future when this movie went into production. Add in William Huck, who has worked on some big films, George Lucas, and you have a group that you would think would make a great live-action adaptation. Unfortunately, in Hollywood, when you put great people together, 90% of the time it turns into absolute crap. I don't know why, but it always seems to happen. First off, this should not have been a live-action movie. Howard the Duck would have worked better as an animated film, and screenwriter Gloria Katz clearly did not understand the comics. Howard the Duck, the comic, despite its appearance, was not really a comedic comic. It was actually very serious, while Katz thought it would work better as a comedy, and that just ruined the rest of it. So, nothing works, and poor Lea Thompson and Tim Robbins try their best, but unfortunately they couldn't save this film. Number 4. Steel. Okay, I'd be lying if I said Steel was one of my favorite comic book characters, but he definitely wasn't my least favorite. In fact, I thought a film adaptation would be rather cool. This movie is completely uninteresting and not even worthy of having its own theoretical poster. In fact, most people probably don't even know that this movie was originally released in theaters because it only grossed a little over $1 million. First of all, this movie was completely miscasted. Shaquille O'Neal was brought along to play John Henry Irons, a man who, in the comics, was a very smart inventor who created his armored costume. Shaq, however, isn't the least bit intelligent in this film. In fact, the writers wrote in 2 partners for him to create his costume for him. Shaq's only role is to play the extremely tall, dim-witted guy who happens to also be our hero. That would make you feel really safe, wouldn't it? Not only is the acting ridiculously bad, but the costume design for Steel will have you laughing every time it's on screen. Even the action doesn't help, but I will say this about the movie. It will definitely give you the best night's sleep ever. Number 3. All the Crow sequels. Like I said before, I think The Crow is the best comic book film thus far, and it's completely ironic that I have to put every other Crow film on this list. I didn't feel like putting every Crow film on separate numbers because that would take up way too much of the list, but let's put it this way. 3 lower-budgeted sequels have been released, and they all suck. Only one of the 3 sequels was actually released in theaters, and it didn't even deserve to be in theaters. To summarize all 3 films without going into too much detail, they sucked in all categories. Acting, action, story, and even the quality of the films was well below that of the first movie. These movies shouldn't even exist. Not much else to say about them than that. Just stick with the original Crow film and avoid these at all costs. Number 2. Batman and Robin. Do I really have to discuss this film again? Oh well. Hey, what happens when you add up Joel Schumacher, Batman, and Toys R Us? You get Batman and Robin. I don't know what happened at Warner Brothers while making this movie, but clearly someone fell asleep at the wheel because this is the most unbalanced and easily the dumbest Batman movie ever made. Warner Brothers immediately thought that since Batman Forever was so successful because it was a little more family-friendly, that making Batman and Robin even more friendly would mean it would be even more successful. Not only is the story completely dull, but seeing George Clooney as Batman is very tough to watch because he puts no effort into the role at all. Arnold Schwarzenegger, despite his great track record in action films, is lame in this film, and every other cast member is pretty much in the same category. It's tough to believe that a franchise could have gone from the dark and gritty movies that Tim Burton created to the family-friendly installments of Joel Schumacher. They're somehow in the same series, but that's still hard to believe. So overall, this movie doesn't deserve to be on DVD, VHS, and shouldn't even have been released in theaters. Joel Schumacher, you should be ashamed of yourself. And number 1, Superman 4. To me, it doesn't get any worse than Superman 4 when it comes to comic films. This was a film that not only had a crappy story, but looked like it was made on a couple bucks. Canon Films had an absurd amount of films being produced and barely had enough money to do all of them, and unfortunately Superman 4 was somehow not big on their priority list and was made on not even half of Superman 3's budget. I wouldn't mind so much if they hit it well that they were on a low budget, but it shows throughout the entire film. Strings and backdrops are noticeable, and the cable work for Superman's flying is the worst cable work I've ever seen in my life. Green screen shots look like grade A crap, and the fight scenes are unbelievably boring. Then there's the new villain, Nuclear Man. Who? Oh, that's right. This is a character that wasn't in the comics. Nope, this is a character they created just for Superman 4. Really? They couldn't pick any other villain from the comics? Superman literally has over 100 villains from the comics, and they couldn't pick one? They had to create a character that looked like he just came out of the WWE. Okay, to sum up Superman 4, it's a half-assed effort. Half-assed story, half-assed action, and it was all made on a half-assed budget. Well, that's my top 10 worst comic book movies thus far. It would be so comforting to know that studios have learned their lesson, but we all know they haven't. All they have to do is remain loyal to the source material, but they can't seem to do that on some occasions. But let's face it, as much as we like to talk about the good films, we also like to talk about the bad films. So they've left their mark in some way, and that speaks volumes. Well, everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.